Hello and welcome to the June 1st podcast. My name is Ethan Moriarty, and I'd like to thank you for tuning in. Right off the bat, I'd like to point you in a couple of directions where you can find more June 1st content. Our YouTube channel, June 1st, with the first spelt out, in the YouTube search engine should be the first channel result. This is where we have all of our storm chasing content, as well as videos detailing some of our engineering work related to weather research. You can go to Twitter and find my personal handle at eMoriartyWX and the June 1st handle at June1stWX. Once again, the first is spelled out. And other social media platforms, which can all be found through our website, www.june1stweather.com. And once again, the first is spelled out F-I-R-S-T. And with that, Jacob Feuerstein is an atmospheric science student at Cornell University, contributing author to the Washington Post and Capitol Weather Gang, and also an intern with National Weather Service Binghamton location. Jacob, welcome aboard.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Lovely. So I got to ask right off the bat, what was your fuel for getting into weather? Was it a particular event, or was it just kind of the early fascination from a young age?
Right. So I'm not sure you're from Hamden, Connecticut. Well, you're not. Sorry, you're not from Hamden, Connecticut. But I know you went to school there. So
Yep.
I guess you kind of understand how weirdly incredible the weather in South Central Connecticut can be. When I was 12, back in 2013, there was a snowstorm that actually snowed 36 to 40 inches in my town of Woodbridge, which is right next to Hamden. And I just remember being absolutely blown away by seeing. I mean, I was 12. I was hardly over 36 inches tall, and seeing 3 feet of snow outside my door, and that kind of introduced me to the Weather Service website. And from there, I was able to really learn a lot about the weather really early. When I was in middle school, I remember looking at SPC discussions and reading forecast discussions and stuff. And as I learned more about it, it just became so much more incredible to me. The more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. And so it's always been something I've been fascinated in. And I guess it's awesome to be able to actually learn formally about stuff that I've been learning like casually about for so long. I love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So would you say that it was snow and snowstorms in particular that were the first nail in the coffin per se to get you into the weather world?
God, yeah, it was snow, but at the same time, I wished it wasn't when I was getting into it. I was so into like tornadoes and hurricanes and all these things that were happening in a lot of parts of the world that weren't Connecticut in 2013. And so, yeah, it was a snowstorm that first exposed me to the Weather Service website. And I love snowstorms. People loved that I told them when there was going to be a snow day. I loved that there were snow days. And I also loved the fact that I could go sledding and whatnot. But I remember ever since really day one, I was always a big weenie for like SPC outlooks and watches and thunderstorm warnings and stuff, which was a little bit difficult being from coastal New England. But
Yeah, coastal New England isn't exactly the most exciting place to be in, especially in terms of mesoscale activity. But I will say that in recent years, that's kind of changed. There's been a number of notable events that have taken place, particularly in the southern Connecticut area, and even a couple weeks ago, where there were a number of tornadoes that broke out on November 13th. Such a unique situation that took place there.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember for like the first 6 years that I was interested in the weather, there wasn't a single tornado watch for my part of Connecticut, except for one over the summer in 2016 during a week that I happened to be traveling. And then suddenly in 2020, there were or two or three, I don't remember, in a month. And there have been all these tornado outbreaks recently from May 2018, which you remember. I mean, we've talked about it before, to the one back in August 2020, to Isaias, and especially to November, which I still haven't wrapped my head around how weird the outbreak a couple weeks ago in Connecticut was.
Yeah, I mean, it literally came out of nowhere because that morning, it was just like, oh, SPC has a slight risk over southern Connecticut, mesoscale discussion later that day. And it kind of just came from nowhere because I'm pretty sure on the day two, it wasn't even really on anyone's radar, it seemed.
Right, which I hate to say is kind of like a unifying string among Connecticut tornado outbreaks. Is a margin. If there's a marginal on day two, there might actually be tornadoes.
Yeah.
I remember that they didn't issue a tornado watch a couple weeks ago, did they?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, I mean, I
I think
can't
there was
imagine.
just
Yeah,
a severe thunderstorm watch.
I
I think
can't
that was the only
imagine.
thing.
Yeah, I can't imagine why they would have. I mean, I was looking at it that morning. I was like, okay, maybe there's going to be a few severe thunderstorm wind gusts in Long Island. I'm always blown away by Connecticut weather. Amazingly, you would think it would be so tame and easy to understand, but here I am, 8 years later, and I still am blown away by it.
Yeah. Do you think that it has to do with the geography that kind of situation unfolded, whether or not it has to do with kind of what's happening along the ocean there, or even just terrain features in general on land?
Yeah, I mean, I've become increasingly convinced by the argument that the ocean plays a huge role in these off-season tornado events. I mean, where else are you going to get dew points in the upper 50s and low 60s in November,
Right.
if not from being so close to the ocean? And then I'm not sure about the November one. I didn't really look closely enough at where the tornadoes were, but I know Hamden has some fascinating terrain. And I mean, both of the violent tornadoes in Connecticut history, the one in 79 and the one in 89, followed the terrain very closely of the Connecticut River Valley.
Yeah, that's another interesting point. Also, what you're saying about the coastal uh, influence. Even this morning at 3 a.m. off of coastal Massachusetts this morning, there was a tornado warning. I don't think it actually produced, but I remember waking up to seeing the tornado warning alert, and I was like, why the heck is there a tornado warning over Gloucester, Massachusetts? These kind of things you wouldn't think would normally happen in here in New England.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at a lot of the data for an article that I wrote a few weeks ago about the November tornado outbreak. And this is off the top of my head, so the numbers might not be exactly correct, but if this one tornado warning in Massachusetts were the only tornado warning issued in November 2021, which is not true, there were a ton a couple weeks ago, but if it were, this would be one of the most prolific off-season tornado months for BOX ever, because there are just so rarely there are just rarely tornado warnings in general in coastal New England, and yet it's not. This is one of like 3 different events now that has produced tornado warnings in the BOX area in the past month and a half. It's so weird.
Yeah. Going back to what you were saying about the terrain influence in
Hmm.
Hamden, the two significant tornadoes, 79 and 89, 90, 89.
79 and 89.
Yeah. It's interesting because both of those were northward moving supercells, if I'm not mistaken.
The Hampton
I
one
mean,
was
what else?
actually southern moving, believe it or not. The Windsor Locks
Oh,
one moved. The one in Hartford in 79 moved like this to the northwest, and the one in
hmm.
Hamden moved to the southeast. I think might have
That's
been southwest and northeast, whatever it is. Super weird.
yeah, but nonetheless, it still followed like that terrain profile.
Right.
Uh, those unfamiliar with the Hamden area, there's a huge mountain ridgeline that rolls right along the western side of town, uh, which make up the West Rock Mountain uh, towards the southern side in New Haven. And then on the east side, you got, Sleeping Giant State Park and the other kind of chain of Appalachian Mountains running up that way along that river valley. And it's another prime example of terrain being influential in terms of tornado genesis, both paralleling it and coming across the gap, especially with the tornadoes in recent years. And what I was noticing was in the June 1st, 2011 tornado here in Western Mass is that the Pioneer River Valley, as it came across the valley, almost acted as a channeling method for the southerly flow to really
Right.
amplify that supercell.
I know people have looked into that a lot in the Hudson Valley, which is, I guess, a little bit closer to where I am now. I've always found it fascinating, and it just like a lot of the things that I love about weather, it just makes such intuitive sense. Like you have this southerly channeling mechanism, which induces more favorable helicity, induces more favorable dew point advection. It just makes such sense. And so it's really cool to see that a lot of tornado events in the area have actually like proven, I guess, that these valleys do have an ability to increase where tornadoes happen. It's really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Would you say that there's a tornado event that has happened in this area that's stuck out to you the most in recent years, or even going back through weather history?
Yeah, so I guess that I actually experienced, the 2018 one was mind blowing. I mean, I've been a huge SPC geek forever, which is the most underwhelming possible thing to be if you're from Southern Connecticut. And suddenly I take my AP Calc exam, I leave my, I leave my high school, and we're in a 60% chance risk for high wind from the Storm Prediction Center. It was mind blowing. And then being from Woodbridge, which is one town south of Bethany and one town to the west of Hamden, and actually having the tornado pass, one of the tornadoes pass just to the north and just to the east was incredible. I mean, I got to tour the damage. It was something unofficially. I was no weather service officer wanted me to come along, but I got to drive through it. It was something that it walked right out of the stuff that I saw happen across the rest of the country. And then I guess if you were to look back further, there are a few that are pretty crazy by modern standards because you really haven't gotten much in the past couple decades. But I think the 1985 outbreak in New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio is just so many leagues beyond anything that's happened before or since. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I'm familiar in the numbers, but I'm not sure if I'm actually familiar with the actual setup that was at play that day.
Right. It was, I mean, I've looked at some war-free analyses, and I guess we're never really going to know exactly what was happening at the surface because it was the mid 80s. And so we didn't have the same remote sensing that we do now and the same station density. But I mean, I've seen in the simulations, dry line over Ohio, I'm completely serious. Dry line over Ohio, like this massive closed low over the Great Lakes, just insane setup, and then that happened to produce in like the maximum possible way, which is just something that doesn't happen in the Northeast.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's definitely a plain style outbreak if you've ever heard of one.
Right.
So something like that happening in the Northeast is not exactly really seen.
Right.
And I wonder if the way that we've been trending in recent years in terms of more, what's the word I'm looking for, abnormal events taking place in the Northeast, that we could see somewhat of a similar situation take place.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing with 85 was that we have in the Northeast, we have events sometimes. And, in 98, we had a handful of F3s. In 89, we had the two F4s. In 79, we had the F4. And then there have been Massachusetts that's seen the F3 in 2011, the F4 in 95. But to have, I think in 85, there were 7 F4 and F5 tornadoes in New York and Pennsylvania and Ohio. It's just so many leagues beyond even what we consider to be the top tier events. What happened in New Jersey this year, they had 2 different EF3s on 2 different days. And that's wild to me, but it's not 7 violent tornadoes in a day.
Yeah, that's a good lead into something else I wanted to talk about was September 1st and both the tornado outbreak and the flash flooding that took place. I know there was a lot of talk about that kind of event. Starting with the tornado event, it kind of exceeded my expectations. I mean, tropical setups are not exactly known to be violent tornado producers by any means, but those southern plains in Jersey there took a beating that day, as well as eastern Pennsylvania and Maryland, if I'm not mistaken. What was kind of the mechanisms that were in play that day?
Yeah, so I guess similarly to you, I just wasn't paying that much attention in the lead up because I was so focused on the flooding threat, which I had expected for a long time would be bananas, and ended up being pretty bananas. But the tornado thing was wild because, like you, I had never known hurricanes anywhere, much less the remnants of a hurricane in the Northeast, to produce multiple significant to intense tornadoes very often. And from what I've seen, I think it had mechanisms fairly similar to Isaias, although honestly, I haven't looked that closely at it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the unusually good low-level instability profile, especially considering the typical full column moisture you see with tropical remnants, combining with the bananas wind shear that you get when you have 65 knot low-level jet overhead associated with what was a Category 4 hurricane 2 days ago.
Yeah.
But I mean, the rarity of what ended up happening is still a little hard for me to come to terms with. It's much easier for me to grasp weather statistics that happened before I got into the weather because they're nicely sorted and put into the place of history. But with things that happened while I watched, like an EF3 tornado, a tornado emergency near Trenton, New Jersey, what is that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that you don't see. I remember watching the outbreak unfold, and I was probably about 98% there in terms of taking the day off to head down there to go just, see what I could see,
Right.
not have the highest expectations. But I was like, I told myself again, I've busted hard on tropical setups before just because of the fact they're moving at such intense speeds.
Right.
And you usually don't have clear air. You're in precipitation the whole time. So it was definitely a unique situation and one that I'm definitely bummed out on missing on. But at the same time, I feel like that would have been a very intense situation to be a part of.
I was just going to say, I mean, I can't imagine how you would have gotten back to either Connecticut or Massachusetts following that, given the wall of flooding.
Yeah, that was the other thing too, because I knew well ahead that flooding was going to be a big issue that day, which is something that you detailed, I know, in extent or to a great extent leading up to the event. Even so, there's still somewhat of this disconnect between National Weather Service and local government officials, particularly in the New York Metro, which is somewhat concerning. I'd say, because, they're throwing out the verbiage of this being an not unpredicted, but kind of coming out of nowhere style event, which was 100% not the case, as you know. What are your thoughts on what needs to be done moving forward in order to kind of relay these kind of communications of threats?
Yeah, sure. So I've always kind of prescribed to this idea that when people call an event, I mean, okay, I guess there are two kinds of people. There are people like Bill de Blasio who are actually in charge of things, and then there are people like your average New York City resident. And I think when a lot of people who don't make decisions, who are your average New York City resident or Connecticut resident or New Jersey resident, say something like, this came out of nowhere, I don't think they really mean like, oh, the WPC didn't issue a high risk for flash flooding. What they mean more is that they've lived in New Jersey or New York City or Connecticut for 50 years, and they had never known that it could rain 3.5 inches in an hour, and that it could rain so much that the Bronx Expressway would turn into a death trap of water and that basement apartments would flood. And it's impossible to blame them for that, because it really does strike without warning if you've never lived something and then suddenly you have lived something. Now, I guess onto what can be done, you really need to focus on the people who can actually make decisions, your politicians, and they were a lot of the same people who were saying, "Oh, this is also something that no one ever told us could happen," and that's just, I mean, I think that to a large extent it was to kind of back away from responsibility, probably because I guess the blame lies with them for not being prepared ahead of time.
Right.
But also at the same time, I don't know if I was in the position of a city leader if I would have been prepared for such a wild, unprecedented flooding event. Obviously, I'd like to think that I would, but it's hard to put myself in the shoes of somebody who's not an atmospheric science major and
Right.
who actually is a politician. I guess there's much less excuse for not having the experts, and there are a lot of experts nearby and listening to them. I mean, it's a city of 8.5 million people. There's really no excuse for not seeking the advice of experts when the weather service is saying such dire things. And I
Yeah.
guess lastly, I ran through this a lot. I thought about Ida a lot in the weeks after it happened. And I feel like this was a situation in which I really don't know what I would have done if I were leading the city or leading the city's emergency management. I mean, I think I saw this coming pretty well. I definitely didn't expect it to be such a catastrophic loss of life event, but I expected it to be one of the worst hydrological things that's happened in the Northeast in a really long time. But what do
Mhm.
you do? I mean, do you say no one can drive after 6 p.m.? That's insane. What if it didn't rain 3.5 inches an hour? That would have cost millions of dollars of lost economic output, especially because the last time New York City said, stop what you're doing, there's a big storm, was in 2015 when it was supposed to snow 2 to 3 feet, and it
Mhm.
didn't snow 2 to 3 feet, and everyone hated them for it. I don't know. It's a really complicated issue, and I guess the moral of the story is I'm not really qualified to. It's like how we don't like when people talk about what they would do if they were at the weather service hot desk because
Yeah.
they've never issued a warning. I've never issued a big political decision. I don't really know what I would have done, but I guess listen to people who do know what to do. Then is something that clearly was not done that should have been done. What do you think? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I think it's a lot of it comes down to that issue of, once again, us being hyper aware of the situation. And I think that a lot of it just comes down to some sort of disconnect between that chain of command within, New York City, their emergency preparedness division, and the mayor's office. And like you said, once again, it's such a tough logistical situation as well, where I'm not really sure what the right answer is to do as well, but I think there could have been some sort of verbiage put out well ahead of time, maybe, that morning or even the night prior, when most people are kind of away from work and tuned into,
Hmm.
some sort of media to some degree. At least putting it on the radar of everyone being like, hey, this is, you know, looking like it's going to be a potentially historic event, and be mindful of where you're at
Sure.
during these hours when we can expect some significant flooding to take place. And the other thing is too is that, uh, like we were saying, with most residents never experiencing something quite like this, flooding kind of gets swept under the rug a bit in terms of it being a serious threat. Hurricane and a tornado is a much more flashy idea
Hmm.
of what a severe weather threat is, but if you look back in history, flooding is the number one killer of any natural disaster. So
Right.
it's it's such a tough visual to kind of give people, especially in flash flooding, where you have water levels increasing at a alarming rate that most people, I mean, you listen to interviews of people that have experienced flash flooding events. They're like, 1 minute it was at the bottom of my driveway. The next thing you know, it's coming through my front door.
Sure.
Uh, it's, I don't think most people realize the speed at which flash flooding can really, go from, just a little bit of water in the street to a life threatening situation.
Right. And I think that even to some extent, the people who do know, I mean, I remember when Ida was happening, when that first slug of really intense convection was getting going, and there were intense tornadoes ongoing in New Jersey, but at the same time there was, or I guess maybe eastern Pennsylvania, but at the same time there were unit streamflow values on MRMS, which are an indicator of runoff, were off the scale for the suburbs north of Philly. I remember thinking, my God, everyone on Twitter is talking about the tornadoes, but like there is a flash flood disaster ongoing to the north. There's a flash flood emergency for parts of the Philadelphia metro. Like I think that tornadoes being flashy is something that even people who know how dangerous flash
Hmm.
flooding is can forget, and or sorry, can make people forget how dangerous flash flooding is, even if they are supposed to know. So I can't imagine how an actual government is supposed to be able to kind of sort through the noise and pick out what is actually important, which is the flooding.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing is too, when it comes to those flash flooding events, is that you're starting off where the rain's dumping, and then you have to kind of trace all these tributaries into
Hmm.
these main river systems, because you're going to see flooding for multiple days after said event. I mean, there were still flash flood warnings ongoing well into the next day,
Right.
especially particularly along, like, I remember the Connecticut River had a flash flood warning along Hartford County going down into New Haven County for an extended period of time on the second. So it's that idea of, it's, you know, not as immediate necessarily. It's kind of this secondary threat that can get tossed aside behind the flashy ones.
Right.
Uh, another example of that flash flooding event, May 31st, 2013, after the El Reno event. Everybody remembers the El Reno event, but if I'm not mistaken, there was some significant flash flooding that took place in the OKC Norman area that
Huh.
claimed more lives than the tornado.
Really? I wasn't even aware of that. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, so it's once again of everyone remembering the tornado,
Right.
but the flash flooding event is something that kind of gets forgotten.
Right. I mean, God, May 20th, 2019, a flash flood outbreak did happen. A tornado outbreak didn't happen. But people talk more about the tornado outbreak that didn't happen than the flash flood event that did. I've always found
Yeah,
that fascinating, and I think I'm the same vein.
yeah. Now, talking a little bit about, you were talking about being behind a warning desk and stuff like that. You were an intern for National Weather Service Binghamton. I imagine you were drawing up warning boxes, but nonetheless, how was the experience at National Weather Service Binghamton, and what kind of stuff were you able to do there?
Right. So unfortunately, because NOAA has been really slow to, I guess, reopen stuff up with COVID,
Hmm.
I still am actually. I still am an intern with the Weather Service Binghamton, and I still have never been into their office. I've never even seen their office. But I that didn't stop me from having a great time, thanks to the amazing people at the Weather Service office in Binghamton. uh, I was able to shadow a ton of shifts, which was really cool. I mean, I'm sure you were at least tangentially aware that across Pennsylvania and southern New York, and I guess into New England too, this was an exceptionally active summer in terms of convection and in terms of flooding.
Yep.
And so, in addition to kind of the basic intern stuff, I did a research project with a hydrologist. I shadowed shifts and kind of non-weather, like things that you have to do whether there's weather happening or not, like the airport forecasts and like updating the grids with temperature data and stuff. But I also got to help gather reports when significant storms were occurring by listening to police scanners. I got to go on a tornado survey, which was an awesome experience. Uh, I got to shadow the hydrologist using some really cool hydrology data things for the instances when the rivers rose, and there were a lot of instances in which the rivers rose. And I'm
Yep.
sure there was a lot of stuff that I've forgotten about, but it was a really cool experience. And I guess if anybody who is in college and is looking for something to do this summer happens to be listening, I would highly recommend that they email their local weather service office, because even though it was unpaid, it was only a few hours a week, so it didn't feel like it was a substantial unpaid burden on my life. It was just a really cool experience to do something I've always wanted to do.
Yeah, for sure. How was the tornado survey experience? That sounds pretty interesting, especially from me coming from the engineering side of things.
Mhm.
I'm fascinated by tornado damage and just kind of putting the math to structures and uh, calculating what kind of forces are at play in order to cause the damage that we see.
So you probably would have been bored out of your skull, unfortunately, because it was all tree damage, and it was all one kind of tree damage, which is like the snapped softwoods that are indicative of low end EF1 damage. So
Hmm.
a lot of snapped softwoods, not a lot of much else. There was one instance of property damage, if I recall correctly, and it was caused by a tree fall. So just
Yeah,
not nothing very interesting from a structural engineering perspective, but
right.
as somebody who is obsessed with the power of convection and snapping trees, I mean, trees are huge and very strong, and there were yards of them snapped, and it was really interesting from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably most northeastern tornado
Mhm.
surveys anyway, is just cutting through forest and,
I mean, thank
you know,
gosh, yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's for sure. I mean, it's not like you get a September 1st kind of situation every day,
Right.
but what's kind of the process that goes into a tornado survey? You know, obviously you get, you know, the report, or you witnessed, you know, some sort of signature on radar that could indicate an area of uh, that needs surveying. What's kind of the I guess the rollout of procedure that takes place?
Right. So this is actually kind of a funny, very atypical story. Typically, what happens is emergency management in a county that's impacted by a possible tornado will call up the weather service at Binghamton and say, "Hey, somebody's house just got flattened, and there are 7,000 trees that are down. You might want to check out if there was a tornado or not." But because this one only hit like sparsely populated portions of the Dryden State Forest, nobody ever called Binghamton. Luckily, though, for them, I guess, I had seen on radar an unwarned segment of thunderstorm wind line had started to look pretty suspicious. There was some VROT. One of my friends, who had a much better vantage point than I did, said he saw a wall cloud over Ithaca. And so myself and a couple of my friends actually drove out to where we thought the radar looked most suspicious, saw a few snapped trees, and so I actually emailed the folks at Binghamton and said, "Hey, you might want to check this out." And so I guess there are multiple ways to skin a cat, the cat being starting a damage survey. And one of them is
Yeah,
your intern gets curious and decides to look for tree damage and finds it. But I guess I'm sort of unaware of, I'm sure, some of the back end stuff that goes into a tornado survey. But from what I saw, they have a storm report app or something like that on their iPads that they take around, and they knock on people's doors and say, "Hey, we're with the weather service. We'd like to look around your yard. We see that there might have been a tornado." And they always say, "Sure, go ahead," because everyone loves the weather service. And they, "Oh, okay, here's a snap tree. That's a 90-mile-per-hour damage indicator." And they create this little line segment that shows where the tornado might have gone. And they drive around town for a few hours, walking around people's yards. And then I guess they go back to their office, and magically, a few hours later on Twitter, you see that there was an EF1 tornado.
yeah.
So once again, maybe not the complete story, but from my perspective, at
Yeah.
least that's what happens.
Yeah, it seems like an interesting combination of kind of like detective work and GIS kind of work going into it. I always found it interesting, like the book of damage indicators. I haven't looked at it in great detail, but it's kind of cool to see how everything's kind of not pre-calculated, but it's just, you kind of have this database of things you can go off of and being like, okay, you see this level of damage that indicates this kind of wind speed. And I mean, for me, I think doing the math behind that and like trying to figure out the future damage indicators is probably more my speed. But even so, I imagine being out in the field would be a pretty cool experience to have.
I'm glad there are people like you, because that sounds like something I would not enjoy spending my time doing. So
yeah. Well, I know Tim Marshall and other engineers right now are working on building up the next generation of the EF scale. I don't know what the enhanced Fujita scale. Who knows what it might be?
I think it cancels out. It goes back to F.
Oh, really? Yeah. Okay.
I'm kidding. I have no idea.
Yeah, E over E. Yeah. So getting back to your time at Cornell, how would you say the atmospheric science program is at Cornell? And I know there's a number of very interesting people there that make it for a great learning experience. If I'm trying to put this thought together, but you get the idea.
I get the idea.
Yeah.
I love it. I kind of chose it because it was a small program. I mean, obviously there are places like Penn State and U Albany that offer incredible educations in meteorology and will make somebody a really awesome meteorologist. But I've always kind of done weather on my own time, and so I was intrigued by a program that would teach me weather formally, but also give me like the space to do what I wanted on my own time with the weather. And by that I mean, like, if you go to a place like Penn State, the way I see it at least is that I guess Penn State is my example of a bigger program.
Right.
The AMS club, which is I guess the weather club, is super rigidly built already. I mean, there are professors who do research, and it's hard to get those research positions, and every single possible opportunity related to the weather has already been exploited, and there's a hierarchy, and you just have to shuffle through it. And I guess at Cornell it wasn't like that because it's so small. I mean, there are only like 8 of us per grade, and so I was able to do stuff as a freshman that I wanted to, like become an executive board member of the Cornell Weather Club, start doing undergraduate research, all this great stuff that I don't think I would have been able to do at a bigger program, because I don't think anyone would have wanted a freshman to do those things at a bigger program. There would have been a hierarchy that I would have had to file into. And I think that it creates some really interesting folks, like you said, because people get to do what they want to do. And so I'm sure you know of like Jack Siller and Aidan Mahoney, who are doing these awesome, very public things. I mean, Aidan's an intern at the Hurricane Center. Jack is doing 7,000 things, and they're all really cool. But even for the people you do know, there are a ton that I guess are kind of less active on the Twitterverse. I have a friend, Harrison, who's at the WPC. I have friends who do awesome air quality research. And it's just really cool to be in this environment with all these people who are like totally doing the most incredible things for their area of interest, because they have the freedom to maneuver it in the ways they want to. And I think I'm taking advantage of that in a good way too, just doing cool things that I've always wanted to do.
You know, it's really funny that you mentioned that, because myself, being an engineer, I went to a lot of big name engineering schools, applied to a lot of them. I'm not going to throw them under the bus, but actually, no, I'll throw one under the bus. Like RPI, RIT, these big named engineering schools. And I went down to Quinnipiac University in Hamden, Connecticut, who has a very small engineering program. And during their admitted students day, when I was, looking at schools and stuff, I got to talk with 2 professors, and I had about an hour conversation with the 2 of them, and just sold me on the fact that, it's a very small, tight-knit program, and there's a lot of room to move around, just like you're saying, within your meteorological context. So if I didn't go to Quinnipiac, I don't think I would have been able to do my own independent research project.
Right.
So it's the same situation, just in an engineering context, where going to a smaller school allows you to kind of navigate your own path and not kind of have to deal with the bureaucracy necessarily that's already in place.
That's a really good way of putting it. And also, I mean, the tight-knit nature of it is something I guess I didn't mention that is awesome. I mean, the other day we had our Cornell Weather Thanksgiving dinner, and like half of the department, including professors, was there. It's awesome. All in one room. Like, we all, when it's application season, we all support each other. All the professors and us are all like good friends. It's awesome. It's really great.
Yeah, it's the same thing at Quinnipiac School of Engineering. And you're talking about how, like, there's Jack who's doing his a million different things with weather, and then I had friends, some that were doing stuff in biomedical engineering, some that were doing stuff in concrete research, and
Right.
people doing all sorts of different things. My graduating class in mechanical engineering was 27 kids,
Right.
and then civil engineering was like 14, and uh, the other majors. But we were a small class size that we all knew each other. We all had one big group chat together. So if we're all stuck on a homework problem, we can all chip in and try to figure it out together.
Right.
So uh, I feel like at a school like that, or a program like that in particular, you're able to kind of flourish in ways that you wouldn't necessarily be able to maybe at a larger institution.
Right. And man, Quinnipiac is the most beautiful place, I think. I grew up there, obviously, and I loved hiking West Rock and Sleeping Giant. I still do. I'm
Yeah,
excited to go back to hike them again in a couple weeks. So I think you made a great choice, obviously.
yeah. No, it was the perfect choice for me. And yes, the surrounding area is beautiful there, especially the Sleeping Giant State Park.
Hmm.
Personally, for me, I wasn't too keen on being on a campus in a city.
Right.
Not how I grew up. Not it
Same.
kind of yeah. I feel claustrophobic in that sense. So I wanted to kind of go somewhere where there was a little bit of nature,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of ponds around, and I like fishing in my spare time to kind of relax. So
Right.
did plenty of fishing and stuff like that, and hiking out in both the state park there and out east towards Brantford, and all the nice trails and stuff that Southern Connecticut actually has to offer.
Right. I mean, I always biked from Quinnipiac. Have you ever been on the Canal Trail?
Yep.
Awesome
Yep.
biking. Unrelated to the outdoors, but my high school science fair was actually at Quinnipiac, Connecticut State
Oh,
Engineering
really?
Science Fair. Yeah, I don't know if you ever volunteered there or anything, but I went like every year. I was in middle school and high school, so I've
No
always
way.
loved Quinnipiac. Yeah, and they're really,
Yeah.
really, really good at hockey. So
Yeah. That was another reason why I went there, was because they had a really cool hockey program, and maybe growing up being a hockey player was it seemed like a natural fit for me.
right, I mean, you guys crushed Cornell when I was a freshman, and we were arguably the best team in the country. So I don't know about, maybe we were second best after you guys. It's yeah, I love Quinnipiac hockey.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just always they've always been a powerhouse for as long as they've been on my radar. So,
Right.
especially the year before I got there, they made it to the Frozen Four. So, uh,
Right.
yeah. Uh, Now moving forward, where do you see yourself in a couple of years? Like, what opportunities do you see in the field of weather?
That is an exceptional question. I've been asking myself a lot of that lately. Okay, so I'm doing the Hollings program with NOAA. And allegedly, there's this new aspect of Hollings where if you want to, you can get effectively guaranteed employment in the federal government after graduation. And so that's awesome. It means I might be able to go right to the weather service after I get out of college, which is something that I've always dreamed of and would be an amazing opportunity. I've also become increasingly, I guess, smitten by the weather journalism side of the field. I've always loved writing about the weather, and actually being able to do it for like a real newspaper over the last few months has been amazing. And so I guess I'll see where that takes me. But I have trouble seeing myself not ending up at the weather service, both because of, I guess, the relative dearth of opportunities offered otherwise in pure meteorology, and because it seems like the weather service is just an awesome place to work. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people there by now, and almost everybody speaks very highly of it. And I mean, what else can you do with any degree that's like that?
Yeah, that's for sure. Getting into a little bit of your writing,
Hmm.
I know for the longest time you were working on your blog at weather.us, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And then most recently, we're contributing to the Washington Post as well as Capital Weather Gang.
Yeah.
Where do you find the enjoyment in writing? And was it just something that you've always kind of been drawn towards in terms of weather journalism? Or was it just something that kind of developed over time?
So I've always, as long as I've loved the weather, I've loved writing about the weather. And I guess I didn't really know it by the name weather journalism. I mean, when I was in high school and middle school, it meant like first writing weather paragraphs in my notes app, because who could I send them to? And then eventually posting on an Instagram account that I made in high school, forecasts that I wrote out. It wasn't until I got to college that I was really able to start writing for real about the weather, which I did. We have this cool thing at Cornell Weather called Ithication, which is a semesterly publication
Hmm.
where everyone gets to write. And so I was able to write some awesome long form pieces about the weather for that. I was able to write weather for English classes and whatnot. And I guess Jack, who you obviously know of,
Hmm.
saw that I enjoyed doing writing about the weather and saw that I was into it. And he offered that I could do the Weather US job once he left. And so that really, I guess, allowed me to go from this thing that I love doing in the hypothetical, which is writing about the weather, and that I'd always wanted to do for real. And it allowed me to actually do it for real. And I mean, I guess writing about the weather isn't inherently awesome. When there's nothing going on, writing about the weather is not very enjoyable to me. It's just writing. But when there's like a real thing happening and you can communicate it, it's just, I don't know. I see the weather in a certain way, and I love the ability to like get other people to see it in the way that I see it, because I think the way that I see it is the most amazing thing in the world. And I think that helping other people see it in that way is also really cool.
Yeah, that's for sure. Uh, I have found your writing very fun, and you break it down in a very, very what's the word I'm looking for? A very digestible way.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really fun to kind of hear the breakdown of these kind of weather events that you can't necessarily. I mean, I myself being mostly involved through weather communication through Twitter,
Mhm.
there's stuff you can't really do in a 240 character or 280 character, whatever the limit is, tweet or a tweet thread. Those threads can sometimes be hard to follow.
For sure.
So yeah, it's nice to actually get like a full article written format, and the fact that it's opened up many avenues for you has been really cool to see. As a bystander, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it's been awesome. I've really enjoyed it for the same reasons you said. I mean, I think that there are very few, if any, media that are as easy to use to tell other people what's happening in the weather in a way that exists as you understand it, other than writing long form blogs or articles.
Yeah. Now, could you see that eventually translating to some other type of media? Would you be? I feel like it would make a good video essay format too, as well.
Right. I mean, I I like language, but I'm not great at it. Especially when put on the spot. And I feel like video is being put on the spot in my language. And I like presenting. I like chatting. But I feel like in order for me to be really proud of an explanation or of a forecast, it has to be something I've written so that I can really have time to stew on every sentence. If you watch me write, it's a lot of deleting,
Yeah.
and videos don't really offer that. I mean, of course, I would try it out if given the opportunity, and I'd probably enjoy it to a reasonable extent. But I think that as far as communicating the weather in a way that I see as like the best way to communicate the weather, I don't think it can get any better than writing.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, because I mean, there's a like a whole market out there on in YouTube for like doing like these video essay style formats,
Hmm,
and I'm not sure if I've seen one a account that's been dedicated to weather per se.
interesting.
So I was just pitching the idea out there.
I mean, I know that
um,
the last person who was really involved with the post when he was in college, Matthew Capucci, is now like totally a broadcast
yeah,
guy. So maybe it translates much easier than I expect it to. I guess I've never really tried. So maybe
yeah,
maybe I'll surprise myself if I ever did.
yeah. Yeah, it's not even necessarily the broadcast side of things, but I feel like it would be cool just to break down, cool events from the past and stuff like that, and
Right.
take that writing format and just add a narration and good graphics to it would be something that would be really cool to see.
Sure.
A nice like 8 to 10 minute long piece. I'm sure that a lot of blog posts like that could be translated to a video format, whether that be you or someone else out there. I
Yeah,
wonder if
sure.
there's a room in the market per se for that kind of stuff.
I've just for the first time, because I am chronically late to things, been getting into the app that is TikTok. And
Yeah.
I've noticed that it is this massive void in which I don't think the weather world has really broken into yet. I mean, these videos have insane amounts of interactions. They have millions of likes. And you would think that there would be some people in the world who devote like some part of their career or passion or hobby or whatever to explaining the weather to thousands of people on TikTok, both for like kind of a public enjoyment thing and also for a it could genuinely save lives thing. And yet I don't think there's any of it. And so I've been thinking, maybe I'll be the person who does that. And then I always think, no, I don't think so. But someone
Yeah.
definitely should. Maybe
Yeah,
if I just stick around TikTok for long enough, I'll convince myself that I can try to be the change that I see fit in the world and maybe start making weather talks.
yeah, yeah. I still haven't downloaded TikTok yet because I have enough distractions in terms of my phone, and that being Twitter and is already enough of a distraction for me that I haven't decided to add another one to it yet.
Right.
But there's a lot of Matthew Capucci is that kind of type where
Hmm.
you could just tell from his enthusiasm in the topic where uh he just presents it in such a fun and enjoyable way. You just
Right.
watch him talk about it, and uh, he's able to kind of break it down for just kind of everyday people that aren't like you or I that are obsessed with the weather and kind of want to learn everything about it. So,
Sure.
uh, maybe he's that kind of person. I know that he definitely has an account. I'm not on there, but I definitely see him being that kind of person to kind of break into that kind of field.
Yeah, for sure.
I know that you've done a lot in terms of the behind the scenes, the forecasting kind of thing. Me being more of a chaser oriented guy, do you see yourself maybe hitting the plains at some point to explore tornado land?
Yeah, so I've always like flirted with the concept of storm chasing to the fullest extent possible. That doesn't involve driving more than 30 minutes away from where I am. I think it's a commitment issue on my part. I've always been afraid that if I choose to drive after a cell, the cell won't happen, or I won't get a good visual, or I'll leave cell service or something like that, and I'll have driven 45 minutes for no reason, which somehow seems egregious to me at the time. I guess I don't know. When I'm really sure something's going to happen, like for example, when Isaias was moving up the East Coast, I would drive to the beaches of Milford, Connecticut, so I could feel the sand on my face. I don't know if that's necessarily storm chasing. I did move so I could experience a storm to a greater extent, but it wasn't exactly running away. I wasn't really chasing
Yeah,
it. Uh, I mean, here in Ithaca over the summer, I did drive after a couple tornadic looking supercells. Didn't see any tornadoes, but I clearly have the streak in me where some part of me wants to see these really intense cells in action. I just haven't yet gotten over my, I guess, stubbornness slash fear of failure enough to do it.
yeah,
If I was, I mean, the people in my weather friends are often older than I am, and they often talk about going to the plains post graduation to see if they can find themselves some tornadoes. And I guess for somebody with a fear of failure, this might be the absolute worst time in the last 50 years to go to the plains to try to see tornadoes, considering that there have been no tornadoes in the plains in at least 5 years now. I mean, that's not strictly true, but is it really too far from the truth?
yeah,
And so, I mean, okay, if I was already in the plains, I would definitely chase tornadoes in the plains. Maybe at some point in my life, I will drive to Kansas.
yeah,
I guess the mindset that I currently have towards it, which is if it's convenient, I might as well. But if not, I'll probably feel bad if it doesn't work out. Might prohibit that.
yeah,
I strongly considered using my Hollings internship to go somewhere that had really cool weather. And I decided to go somewhere that had really cool outdoors instead, which I think is not a bad
oh, for
choice
sure.
considering that really cool weather over the summer really just means it is 115 degrees with a dew point of 75 every single day, and maybe you will see one derecho. So I mean, I was in Iowa over the summer back when I was in early high school, and I got to see some large clouds. So
Yeah,
yeah.
big open sky country out there. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, you want to talk about your upcoming experience? I guess if we want to put
Yeah,
it that
sure.
way.
Yeah. So I guess for I don't know. You probably know what Hollings is,
Yep.
but I'll explain it for all the people who might not. It's an internship opportunity offered through NOAA. NOAA is kind enough to have three different opportunities for young folks like me who are bright-eyed with passion for eventually working for the Weather Service that actually pay money, unlike the student volunteer experience. There's pathways, which is like you basically do the work of a National Weather Service person as a kid, and then once you finish, you will be basically guaranteed a job in the Weather Service. There's LaPenta, which is you get to do research at a national center, for example, the WPC or the Air Quality Office. And then there's Hollings, which is a little bit like both, where you do a mainly research oriented project, but it's at one of like dozens of different weather service sites. And so I'm doing Hollings, which is awesome. It's like the coolest program I've ever been part of. And for my project, I decided I would go to the great National Weather Service Fairbanks for a project that is completely different from anything I've done in the past, which I think is really cool. It's driving around, or I guess traveling around, presumably by car, to the various partners of the Weather Service up in Fairbanks, which I guess means the clients, quote unquote clients, because no one's really paying the Weather Service, who are consulted with when it comes to decision support. So, in upstate New York, that means like the state fair or local races. And it's not a very logistically demanding task generally, because the National Weather Service office is only around a dozen counties, and the decision support clients all speak the same language as the Weather Service, and there's no giant cultural divide, and the types of weather that impact are all fairly symmetric across a Weather Service office. But up in Fairbanks, which is massive and has dozens of different types of cultural groups that speak dozens of languages, and has a massive variety of weather event types and types of decision support needs, there's a need for somebody, I guess, which is going to be me, to travel around and talk to clients and have conversations and interview people and write about what those needs actually are and how the Weather Service can meet them, and to collect a database of decision support needs and of old weather event information about Alaska. And so as somebody who's always loved writing about weather, who's always loved old weather events, who's always loved talking to people and traveling around, and who's always loved hiking in Connecticut, I figure that doing all of that in Alaska, where it's all better, might be great.
Yeah, that sounds.
And so it sounds really cool, and I'm definitely hoping to the moon and back that it can be in person. I don't know why it wouldn't be, but
yeah,
I've never known the government to be very quick with things, so I'm a little concerned about that. Now, this is over the summer. This is for 10 weeks over the summer, but there is a 4-day site visit that is in a month. And seeing that Fairbanks is struggling to break negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit over the past few days, I am quite nervous about being there during the winter solstice. So.
Yeah. Not sunlight will be lacking. That is for sure.
I'm from Ithaca, so I'm used to sunlight being lacking. But
yeah, I think Ithaca sunlight being lacking versus Fairbanks sun lacking are two different levels of lacking sunlight. So.
Perhaps. I am excited to see the aurora, which no one has ever promised me, but I feel like if I'm ever going to see it, it might be when I'm in Fairbanks on the darkest day of the year.
Oh, that's more than likely, especially that we're getting towards a more active solar cycle pretty soon.
I have this giant, possibly irrational fear that I'm going to fly up to Fairbanks. It's going to be all this fanfare. I'm going to freeze my butt off. And I'm going to step outside only to find that there's some K9 or whatever, I don't know how solar storms are measured, solar storm, and that the aurora is so far south that I can't see it from Fairbanks. I don't know if that's even how they work, but that you all in Connecticut and New York can see it bright as day, and then I'll cry and then go back and it'll switch with
yeah me. I don't think that's how that works. I think you'll
okay, that's good to hear.
I think I'm pretty sure it's just the this is where my lack of space weather really kicks in, but I don't think that's how that works, though. I think it's just you're going to get the most intense bit of it. As long as it's not a massive CME that wipes out, the electrical grid, I'm fine by it. So
that's what I'm hoping for. I know there's this other Hollings kid, Isaac, who seems to know a lot about space weather. He's going all the way to Florida, though. So yeah, I guess maybe he should be going to Fairbanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, with that, Jacob, I want to thank you very much for joining me today.
Yeah.
Now, lastly, do you have anything that you want to plug, and social accounts or areas that people can find you at?
Yeah, sure. So find me on my Twitter, I guess, Jacob_Feuer, Feuer. I post about the weather a lot. If you want to read the articles I write, I tweet about them all there. So thanks for having me, Ethan. This has been great.
Yeah, of course. I'll be glad to have you back at some point in the future as well, and I'm sure we can have a lot of great conversations, especially about your Fairbanks experience in the future, as well as who knows what kind of events will take place in the spring of 2022 and forward from that, or of course this upcoming winter where there's going to be plenty of snow, more than likely, with this La Nina coming up.
Maybe the EF5 tornado drought will finally end and there will be one in New Jersey at this rate.
Yeah, who knows?
Maybe.
Tornado Alley shifting east. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening, and take care, and have a good night.
Thank you.